This is Duke University.
Global trade and environmental justice.
Human rights issues are still.
The term Ubuntu.
The Alien and Sedition Acts.
Is making inferential discovery.
The importance of an archive.
The John Hope Franklin Center.
20 years ago with the film Daughters of the Dust, filmmaker Julie Dash gave us an extraordinary and beautiful portrait of the American South as it was experienced through the eyes of African American women. More than 20 years later, the artist LIzz Wright, jazz vocalist, blues, gospel, say what you want to call it, this extraordinary singer has given rhythms and melodies to that beauty of the American South. We are proud this week to present on Left of Black, filmmaker Julie Dash and vocalist LIzz Wright. I'm Mark Anthony Neal, and this is Left of Black. Welcome to Left of Black. I'm your host, Mark Anthony Neal, and we are joined today by a very special guest, Julie Dash, who is visiting us here in our studios at the John Hope Franklin Center at Duke University. She is here to celebrate with us the 20th anniversary of her groundbreaking film, an African-American woman's film, Daughters of the Dust, which was released 20 years ago this year. How are you doing?
Hi, how are you?
Thanks for joining us and taking some time out. Thank you. I want to start with a couple of things. The film, some people would describe it as kind of a cult favorite. Mm-hmm. It clearly made a cultural mark, not just in terms of African Americans in general, but clearly in the black film world, as a model for how much we can imagine in the kind of films we want to make. Greg Tate has this great quote, where he talks about, other than, Bill Gunn's Ganja and Hess, right? He couldn't think of any other film that, in talking about Daughters of the Dust, had really captured the full range of possibilities, for us as a people. And of course, you had a long history, right? This is, part of where you come from.
Yes.
In terms, so talk a little bit about getting the idea for Daughters of the Dust in your head and, hoping to see it, to fruition. Yeah.
Okay, well, part of my long history begins at the Studio Museum of Harlem in New York City.
Wonderful place.
Yeah. Well, years ago, they had a film workshop, and I started attending that workshop.
You were 17 years old? Yeah.
Yeah, well, you know everything. Yes,
and I can imagine, just thinking about those days, how many young folks are thinking about, I want to be a filmmaker? Right, and how many, visible examples of black filmmakers are there that they could tangibly look to and it's like, I want to be like that person?
Well, there were about 20 of us. We didn't know we wanted to be filmmakers. We just knew that it was fun. Let's just say that. We were drawn to the excitement and to the challenge of working with equipment that was unfamiliar to us. And it was 16 millimeter equipment at the time.
It was before digital.
It was way before digital, way before. And but it was a wonderful time that opened many doors for me, because one of the doors was not just a physical door, was the door of imagination, of the notion that I could create worlds within a frame. I could possibly even reinvent the world. I could reinvent my world.
There's that great line from Toni Cade Bambara in the Making of book, Making a Daughter, and she talks about the grandmother, saying to the kids, yes, you can walk on water, right? As long as you know where you're going, right? Yeah. And this idea that it really was about, unlocking the imagination in us. Yeah.
And exploring not just the cinema that was contemporary to the time, but exploring where cinema was going in terms of the African American experience, and exploring the cinema of ideas, which other cultures, have been doing since the beginning of time, but we have almost been forced into this agitprop at the time. So it was a wonderful opportunity for myself and Arthur Jafer and Carrie Marshall, who did the production design, to just stretch out and relax into what was possible with African American cinema.
You're watching Left of Black. We're joined today by a very special guest, film director and screenwriter, Julie Dash, who is here at Duke University, here at the John Hope Franklin Studios, talking about the making of her film, 20th anniversary this year of Daughters of the Dust. You grew up in Queensbridge, in the Queensbridge houses, and I thought that was really interesting because it's also where Nasir Jones, Nas, grew up. His father Oladara, and so we've heard about all this genius coming out of Queensbridge, because of Nas, and now we know there's so much more.
Shantae Moore, the real Shantae.
The real Shantae. You decide after having this experience at the Studio Museum that you'd like to be a filmmaker, and eventually you head out to try to go to film school.
Yes.
At UCLA, and part of the appeal, I would imagine, of UCLA at the time, what Clyde Taylor calls the LA Rebellion, right? You had Charles Burnett, Larry Clark, Halle Jarima, all these folks out there kind of pushing boundaries, right, about what black film should look like. And of course, Jarima does, Bush Mama, in terms of Charles Burnett, To Sleep with Anger is much later, but Killer Sheep. So it's a movement. So you go out there to be part of that movement. And what happens when you get out to UCLA?
When I get out to UCLA, I find out that even though it wasn't difficult to get into film school at the time, and today it's nearly impossible, I couldn't get in because I was missing one letter of recommendation from my undergraduate school. And so instead I went to the American Film Institute, the conservatory at AFI.
And you end up getting a fellowship there, and you tell this story, of going there for the first time, just trying to get a grant, and you run into this cat, right, who you think,
and
is
who that
just
is?
a janitor, and it's Ted Lang, right? It's the actor Ted Lang, right, who you also find out, co-writes Larry Clark's Passing Through.
Right.
I mean, what I find so amazing about, your trajectory in this regard is that you realize that there are all these folks who, from the jump, had a very serious concern about black cinema, right? And they had to make their own way, if you will, right? To be able to support themselves financially and also try to give the products they could. I mean, that's kind of like the Danny Glover story, right? We get all these kind of Lethal Weapon, movies from Danny Glover that gave him the flexibility to do stuff that was much more important to him, right? Sam Jackson's another good example of that, right?
This is true.
And so you start shooting, and most folks only know of you because of Daughters of the Dust, right? But that's not your first film.
No.
You have a film, Diary of an African Nun.
Correct.
For Women, which is inspired, of course, by the Nina Simone song. These film shorts, Illusions, and talk about the work that you did on these early film shorts.
Well, I guess. Diary of an African Nun and Illusions really came from the work that, I began and For Women at the American Film Institute. Because at that time I was drawn to moving from documentary into the narrative film format. How do you tell a story? How do you structure a story? What is the correct way to do this? And then after I learned how to do everything the correct way, I turned around. Well, not that Daughters of the Dust is incorrect, but I veered from the traditional Western narrative structure, and like with who's narrating, I chose to have two narrators instead of a single narrator. And tradition tells you in Western film structure that you could only have one narrator. But I said, no, how about having someone narrate who's from the past and someone who's from the future. And then,
change it up. For Illusions, the actress who stars in it is Lonette McKee. What kind of challenges did you have trying to get, actors and actresses to sign on to film, knowing that, these weren't projects that were going to make them money, right? They could work on their craft, right? But it wasn't.
And that's exactly what happened. Someone gave me Lonette's number and I shakingly dialed. This is back during the day when you actually dialed, I shakingly dialed the number.
She's coming off of Sparkle and a bunch of,
she has the album. She has a beautiful voice. And she had words and music. Her first album was really hot. And just like you said, she wanted to work on her craft, and she agreed to do it on the first telephone call. She said,
Wow.
that'll be interesting.
Wow.
When do we start? And it was like, soon. You know?
And so you begin seriously thinking about Daughters of the Dust in the mid-1980s. And by the way, you're watching Left to Black. I'm Mark Anthony Neal. We're here with film director Julie Dash, talking about her groundbreaking film, Daughters of the Dust. You began thinking about the film in the mid-1980s.
Actually, I began thinking about Daughters of the Dust while I was at AFI, so that was late 70s.
Okay.
Even though, you know, all of the directors there did not get a chance to make a film, but I still worked on it. I was, you know,
Did you
designing
find any difficulty? Because I know you got started, you know, working on Larry Clark's Passing Through. And did you find any difficulties being a woman in particular, but a black woman trying to navigate? I mean, were there folks saying you don't really want to be a filmmaker? Or,
yes, they were. You know, there were those who would say, "Well, are you really trying to be a backdoor actress or something?" It was like, "Oh no, no, no,
Right,
no."
right. The worst stereotype, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Really, at the time, when I started going to the Studio Museum of Harlem, my intention was to be a cinematographer. So I come in from the tech end of it, and on Larry Clark's film, I worked as, you know, assistant sound technician. Back then, we did it all. I mean, not that people don't do it all now, but we had to string our own lights. You know, we had to do our sound systems. We had to shoot a lot of our own work.
Classic make a way out of no way. I mean, that's
exactly. We were
extended to the filmmaking
filmmakers,
tradition.
and
Yeah.
you know, and then, you know, which a lot of people are still today, but. Many directors do come from acting. You know.
When you start shooting Daughters of the Dust down in the Georgia Sea Islands, it's also a moment that the career of Spike Lee is taking off.
Very much so.
Was that something that, you know, seeing his success, right, and doing the kind of film that, because he was not doing packaged Hollywood film. I mean, that was clear.
Exactly. We all knew Spike, you know, and you know, we met him. I met Spike in '79.
And it's a small circle. I mean, it's just it's not a whole lot of you. Right?
Yeah, most filmmakers we knew one another, and we still do. I saw his first feature, which is
Joe's Bed-Stuy. We cut heads.
Well, actually, he had one before that called something hilarious. The name was, but. Spike was, you know, younger, really driven, really aggressive, but in a very quiet way. And he was just pumping stuff out back then, before She's Gotta Have It. And so when She's Gotta Have It came out, I was like, oh, Spike is going sexy on us. It's like, what is that Spike, you know? So it's like we were all very proud of him. And yes, he raised the bar. And he just like kind of pretty much eclipsed all of us, and we were going like, whoa, we better get this together. Yeah. Spike is, you know, he's doing it, you know, and he's pushing boundaries, and so everybody kind of sat up and said, okay,
we need to pay attention, right? Time for us to get our thing on,
exactly,
right?
Exactly.
You kind of face the classic filmmaker's dilemma, right? You get started shooting and the reality hits in, right? We need more money. Talk about the struggles in those days, right? I mean, because even if you think about black filmmakers, say a decade later, at least they can point to, you know, not just a Spike Lee, but a range of other successes, right? Including Julie Dash now, right? You know, what was it like trying to get folks and raise money to support the film? We're the only real example out there, right, you know, in terms of black filmmaking. On the one hand is someone like Spike Lee, but then maybe someone like Eddie Murphy, right, in terms of just the star power.
Yeah, just like in-house within the arts community and film community, we knew that there was Kathleen Collins Prettyman, who was successful in having created 2 feature films. Didn't get broad distribution.
And which you can't find now, but it's another story, right?
Yeah, and I met her years ago when I was working for St. Clair Bourne in New York and Chamba. And you know, she's a wonderful person, and she's really was my inspiration in the 70s, because I got to look to her and Jessie Maple, who was in the Cameramen's Union in New York, and she made a film called Will, a feature-length film back in the day, starring Lavetta Devine.
Wow.
Yeah, these films.
Wow.
We need to find them and make sure that everyone
get
gets a
preserved,
chance
right?
to see them, because those films stand as our, inspiration
Absolutely.
for, an African American woman successfully making a long form narrative.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Talking about when you start shooting the film and trying to raise money. Yeah.
I had a tremendous amount of support, not just from the National Endowment for the Arts, then the National Black Programming Consortium put in some money, but also Women Make Movies. They were distributing some of my other films, and they had a fundraiser for me in New York, Deborah Zimmerman and the Women Make Movies people. And everyone was like really excited by the notion of this feature film being made, a historical drama.
Right.
And so in many ways, I think it was easier for me to raise money for that film than, because the climate, the atmosphere right now in the arts community, it's very difficult to get funding. But it took me like 15 years to raise little bits of money and complete the research and do all that and do a 10-minute trailer that we shopped around to American Playhouse Theatrical Films, and then they put the bulk of the money in.
Nice.
But that struggle still exists.
Absolutely. I mean,
That struggle
that's
still
irony now
exists
that-
20 years from now. But now with digital filmmaking, you actually may not need as much money as we had. We had $800,000, but it's still a struggle.
I mean, talk about that $800,000. I would think that any filmmaker, young filmmaker, not so young filmmaker, who's interested in making independent film, right, where it's really about the work, as you say, right? It's not about blockbusters and all those kinds of things. That, if someone offered them $800,000 to make a film, if someone offered them $800,000 to make 2 films, right? They would be very excited about that. And given the kind of success that can occur in very small films, finding their niche, finding the right audience, and particularly now with social media, getting marketed the right way, why wouldn't studios want to make those very small investments that can return to them 5 times?
That's a wonderful question now, isn't it? That's because the whole, when you position it that way, we see that it's illogical not to promote the genius that's out there, not to promote the artists who are have a passion for it. Why are you giving chunks of $60 million to someone
to make a film that's not even going to make back that $60 million. And and it's funny because then it also gets you to realize that you don't really need the Hollywood machine to do that. Where are the BETs?
Because now we have on demand, streaming, video streaming.
Right, absolutely. The film gets done. It's an amazing film. The cast and crew survive Hugo.
Hugo and the blood-sucking gnats on the beach.
And sometimes when I've shown the film to students, and you mentioned about how you're doing something different with the narrative, they are not culturally prepared to watch a movie like this, right? There's a kind of obvious linear narrative, and they're used to the explosion at a certain point. I mean, it's just a way that we watch Hollywood film in which they're trained to think of film, that when they see
and it ruptured their reality, it's not. And
you
they
mentioned
say,
it, right? You wanted it to feel like it was a foreign film, right? I mean, I think a lot of people experience it that way, this kind of rupture of the time-space continuum for them. But the first thing I often say...
But they never forget it.
No.
They never, and you know why we do that is because I remember when the first time I saw, I guess I was in high school, I saw Eisenstein's Potemkin. And I'm looking at this silent movie. It was silent with little words at the bottom. And I was, we were snapping our gum and chewing and talking about, what, you have to read this thing? Where's the color? We were, you know how you are in high school, you're belligerent. It's like, what? How you gonna show me this? And there ain't no sound. And I never forgot it, and it ruptured my reality. It made me sit up and say, now wait a minute, what's happening here? These shots, it doesn't look like what I normally see. And now I can't get enough of foreign films because I believe it's like it like drags you kicking and streaming through portals of time and information and culture and traditions that normally you just lulled when you're watching television and going to movies. You're just lulled by the same. The music tells you what to do in most, you know. You know, it's like duh, or oh, now I'm supposed to feel sad and cry. You know, it's like. But when you're like totally immersed into a situation where you have to find your balance and your reality is ruptured and your eyes are open, it's like, where am I? What's happening? You begin to question your world, the larger world, storytelling, reality, and I think all of that's a good thing. Yeah.
You're watching Left to Black. I'm Mark Anthony Neal. We're joined by film director Julie Dash, director of the legendary, classic, cutting-edge, groundbreaking film Daughters of the Dust, which is being screened here at Duke University as part of a 20th anniversary celebration. The thing that I always leave with the film is just the sheer beauty of it. It is a beautifully shot film. And even as folks, even as folks kind of struggle with the narrative, right? You know, they are left with this like, I can't stop looking at it, right? And it's funny because you get a glimpse of Steven Spielberg trying to do that, right, in The Color Purple, right? But it's not quite the right context, right? And then of course when you do it in Daughters of the Dust, and all the conversation about indigo, right? You know, which is, you know, appears in all these kind of patches all throughout the film.
It's the visual color theme throughout that's a visual metaphor for slavery. Yeah. Because I think we are so lulled into dullness by the cotton
right.
metaphor.
I mean, when you see the hands, right? Everybody's hands are stained.
That's the stain of slavery.
Yeah.
Forever, you know, the poisonous stayed on our hands and on our lives, but in a different kind of way. Yeah. Because of course, I always explain to people, the indigo would eventually washed off, worn off, but I wanted to show slavery in a different way, to speak of slavery rather in a different way, rather than, oh yeah, we got whipped, oh yeah, the cotton, picking cotton, because everyone's now just like picking cotton. You know, it's like, but let's look at it a different way.
So if this was a VH1 behind the music story, right, inevitably the way mainstream culture would frame it, right, is, well, what has Julie Dash been doing, right? And you know, contrary to what folks have think, like any good filmmaker, you've been working, right, in all kinds of venues, including music videos.
Oh yeah.
And so the beautiful video that you shoot for Tracy Chapman, and Give Me One Reason, right, and the wonderful way that Diane Reeves, just kind of saunters, into the narrative, and one of the most compelling things that I think you did from that period, HBO's Subway Stories.
Oh yeah.
Where they ask all these folks to, kind of send in stories about things they've experienced in the subway, and you do a piece, called Sax, Cantor, and Riff, with the R&B singer Terrell Hicks, the saxophonist Kenny Garrett, and it's just an
and you know who the Noodle Man was? Alex.
Wow.
Not Cox, Alex. Anyway, he was always in Charlie's Angels. And
It's an amazing piece of film. I mean, it's a reminder, right, that what you can do with a short amount of time. And so it tells this really incredible story that's so
locked on a subway platform.
Right, and so quintessentially New York, right, but also so quintessentially about, this notion of black trauma. Did you want to do more things? I mean, when I remember seeing the first couple, I remember hoping that it would be like a regular recurring series.
Oh yeah, wanted to do Subway Stories would have been nice to continue with it, but it was very experimental at the time.
And give HBO some credit. I mean, they were willing to do that kind of work.
Exactly. It was produced by Jonathan Demme and Rosie Perez, and I remember Rosie Perez called and left a message on my voicemail, and I thought it was one of my friends playing
trying to sound like Rosie Perez.
Saying when I come to New York and she wanted to confirm, you're from New York, right? And I was like, I thought it was a joke at first, but you know, she was very sweet and you know, very supportive and all of that.
You also do a TV movie about Rosa Parks.
Yes.
What is
With
that
Angela
like
Bassett.
compared? What's that like working in that arena? And those, and were they more restrictive and limiting, you know, than you normally would experience, say, doing something like Daughters of the Dust?
You know, it's funny. In many ways, people may think that they were restricting and limiting, but having come from the independent film world,
actually had
I know
research.
how to make a feature film in 17 days.
Yeah.
We did that in 17 days. We did Funny Valentines in 16 days. Whereas normally in feature films you get 40 days, 45 days, but of course in Daughters of the Dust we didn't. And I'd worked on so many films like, you know, like Larry Clark's film and Charles Burnett's films that we would just, you know, you work very long hours and you just get it done. You don't have the luxury of the days because you don't have the money, you know, so you have to get in and get out. So actually, working the television movies is grueling.
Yeah.
You know, on Rosa Parks, the last week it was 7 days out of 7 days, 12, 18 hours.
Wow.
We were losing student interns.
Right, I can
They were
imagine.
dropping out. They would not come back the next
Passing
day.
out, right? It's like
They would just leave. It was like, they were saying, oh, this is ridiculous. I don't want to work on
Yeah.
a movie like this, but that's what it took.
So, I know you're going to be diplomatic here, but it's impossible to talk about contemporary black film and not talk about the influence and the success, you know, whatever that means, of Tyler Perry.
Oh, okay. I thought it was that other film. And I'm bracing
No,
myself.
we're not talking about The Help.
Yes,
What do you say to the influence of Tyler Perry?
I say thank you.
Wow.
I say thank you because he proved that the audience, that there's an audience for, you know, number one, for films.
black film.
Yeah, for black films.
And beyond
he
the
was
black community, right?
Yes, beyond, you know, crossover films, and that and he's been successful with that time and time again. And so he's priming our audience, nurturing them and giving them what they want. However, he's not the only voice that could help to feed their minds and to you know, provide them with entertainment films. I would love for more of us to have those same opportunities.
Yeah. Well, what would you have done with For Colored Girls?
I think that since I'm always telling people I was raised on For Colored Girls,
Right.
you know,
Right.
coming out of New
Right.
York
Right.
in the 70s. I saw and felt it a totally different way.
Right.
That was his version,
And give him some credit for trying to work through some stuff, right? You know, in his version of the film, but
yeah. But I saw and felt it an entirely different way.
Yeah.
Every beat by beat, it was, you know, it was like I'm like.
One of your recurring quotes is that, in talking about Daughters of the Dust and the films that you do in general, is that you want to make African American women's film. What does that mean?
It means that I have, since I am an African American woman and I was raised by African American women, and I grew up in Queensbridge, which was predominantly African American and Hispanic, that I want to see on the screen the people I know and recognize and love the way I see them. And even with contemporary films, when I see people, African American, they're unrecognizable to me physically, how they're lit, what they're wearing, what I remember of those time periods, and their actions are like, you know, like, oh, okay.
I remember reading this quote some time ago from Avery Brooks when he was shooting the television series Spencer for Hire and then Hawk. And you know, he mentioned he's going back and forth with producers and they're imagining what black people are. And he just goes, I don't imagine black people, I live with them.
Yeah.
Right. And so he had a different commitment to what the project was going to be. What are you working on these days?
I am working on developing a mini-series about the 6th AAA Postal Battalion, the first group of African American women to work overseas during World War II.
And again, the technology is in such a different space now that we could imagine this to be, you know, an on-demand project.
It's a true story.
Yeah,
And people don't even know about
anything
them.
about it.
You know, and 4 of them died over there.
You also mentioned that you're working on a cyber thriller.
Yes, called Cypher. Young African-American woman who's an encryption specialist. She's 3rd-generation mathematician from MIT. And she holds the keys to our digital liberty.
Yeah. Have you reached out to Zoe Saldana? No.
I will definitely do that. We have plans on doing that. We love her.
I'm Mark Anthony Neal. You've been watching Left to Black. We've been joined today by film director Julie Dash, who is visiting us here at Duke, and specifically here in the John Hope Franklin Center, our studios in the basement, to talk about her groundbreaking film, Daughters of the Dust, and her groundbreaking career as a film director. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hit the ground, baby, 'cause it's all right now. Hit the ground, baby, take your veil down. See your eyes in mine. You can leave the rest behind. Hit the ground, baby, 'cause I want to love you now. Hit the ground, baby, yeah. It's all gonna be alright. Hit the ground, baby. We are gonna make it somehow. Tell me why you're lonely, yeah, when the day has just begun. Hit the ground, baby. Hit the ground and run. Can't you see your eyes here in mine? Leave all the rest, leave it all behind, my darling. Hit the ground, baby. Hit the ground and run.
Good afternoon and welcome back to Left to Black. I'm your host, Mark Anthony Neal, and we are honored this afternoon to be joined by vocalist LIzz Wright, coming to us from her home in Asheville, North Carolina. How are you doing today, Liz?
I'm doing great, Mark.
We wanted to have you on, one, because you're going to grace the stage here at Duke University as part of Duke Performances on October the 7th. And we're all, of course, very excited about having you come through. But to really talk about, where you are musically at this point in time, your musical career. I know a lot of folks, you kind of came out of nowhere when your first album, Salt, was released in 2003. And you immediately became kind of the it girl, if you will, at least in terms of folks talking about jazz music. But in some ways, thinking of you as a jazz musician is really reductive. I mean, you have recorded a range of genres, a range of styles. I mean, how would you define yourself as a vocalist?
Well, thanks for the question, Mark. I feel that I come from a tradition of storytelling. My father read me a lot of stories from Uncle Remus to Shakespeare. We really went through a lot of books, and and I listened to a lot of radio dramas growing up because my father wouldn't let us watch TV. He felt like, we would lose our focus. So storytelling is really important to me. And I discovered jazz because of NPR. I listened to Marion McPartland's Piano Jazz Show, and she'd sit there and talk with their host, and it could be Oscar Peterson or Shirley Horn, whomever. And the fellowship and the dialogue was really what brought me into jazz, and it felt familiar, in fact. So you're right. I can't be limited to jazz because I really didn't start there. But inside of jazz, I find beautiful storytelling and some great deliverers of song and story. And the jazz vocalist really brought it all together for me. And I just love it. It's definitely one of my roots.
You grew up in Georgia, and of course were exposed to a lot of religious music. How much of the sermon tradition, if you will, has impacted your storytelling ability and how you see yourself as a vocalist?
Well, one of the things I noticed early, Mark, when I really started writing more prolifically, was just that the cadence of the poetry of scripture actually showed up in my writing. And actually some of the things I wrote before I was ever signed to Verve were pieces that worked in church. So, but they were more like psalms, It wasn't really like tell you how to live kind of gospels, the other kind. more worship and and meditative stuff. But anyway, just the things that I read and the things that were read to me, the stories that were told to me, really affected the way that I came into writing, and affected the way that I came into interpreting music and stories.
We're here with LIzz Wright. You're watching Left of Black. I'm your host, Mark Anthony Neal. One of the things that I loved about your first album, artists have all kinds of struggles, and unfortunately many artists are forced to sing other people's songs. You recorded your own music very early in your career. How important has it been to be your own songwriter in some cases? And what kind of struggles did you have within the industry, being able to convince, whoever that it was important for you to sing your own songs?
Well, there's a couple of ways I can answer that, Mark. One of the things that has affected my path is that I literally came straight out of the church and a little bit of choral music at school, but mostly out of the church. And I loved what I did in church. I loved what I felt about it. My father let me have a lot of free reign to figure out, how to help out. And there was so much help needed that I had a lot of space to just figure out how I wanted to, to lead the congregation in music and take care of different sections of the service. And so those were the skills that I had. And really no other training by the time I got around to Verve. And I told the president of Verve at the time, who was Ron Goldstein, I said, Ron, I come from a small place, but I'm happy with who I am and where I come from, and I'm not going to change for you or anybody else. Just want you to know. And he just bust out laughing. But we had a moment of connection and trust that has really been the beginning of my long and pretty peaceful relationship of good communication with Verve. I loved where I came from. I didn't really want to trade who I was.
Who are some of your musical influences?
Oh, it's tremendous. In jazz, I have to say some of the first names that come up are Abby Lincoln. She's an incredible storyteller, beautiful writer, very powerful. Nancy Wilson is just a performer on a level that cannot be approached. I'm sorry. She can stand there and just express her womanhood with so much dignity and so much power.
The little thing that she does, with the mic, where she's pulling it back and forth from her voice to kind of change.
Technique institution, Nancy Wilson. And Shirley Horn used space in a way that could make all of us feel incredibly vulnerable. She's had such a tender power with her use of space, and is incredibly musical as well. So the great thing about these women as examples, I mean, there are many more, is just that they really give you a piece of the beauty of what it is to be human. Nina Simone's extremely powerful. and very emotional. And she and Odetta are incredible influences for me because they would take a lyric and just they could eat you alive with it, or they could, you know, really make you care about the smallest, simplest thing. And they were curators of music. They picked music from all genres, and they both understood the classical approach as well, which I think is really important for a lot of contemporary singers to know the value of knowing the classical approach, because you can get the voice to do a lot of powerful things and really discover your instrument through studying that. So those are some of my influences.
You're watching Left of Black, and we're joined and honored to be joined this afternoon by vocalist LIzz Wright, coming to us from her home in Asheville, North Carolina. I like that idea of, you know, these women being curators of sound, and I very much see you in that same vein. I think about your first album, and you record Afro Blue, again, this kind of nod to Abbey Lincoln, but at the same time, as soon as I get home, you know, the song from the Wiz, and then your second album, and you know, Dreaming Wide Awake, which is an album that I love, you know, still something that I play all the time. And what I loved, of course, were the kind of treatments that you do to very different songs, A Taste of Honey being one that kind of stands out. What do you look for, besides the storytelling quality, what else are you looking for in the song? You know, in terms of song structure, melody, etc.
I just meet the song the way I would meet a person, and I am usually provoked by something in a good way. You know, there's something striking about it, and learning the song after I feel that spark is also about learning the spark. Like, what is it that grabbed me about this song? And sometimes it is a melody. Like, my favorite melody in the whole world is Blue and Green. I think that's the most beautiful melody in the world. Yeah. And I remember getting stopped in my tracks when I first heard it. I wasn't even listening, but it kind of grabbed me. And also sometimes it's the lyric, but there's a lot of subtle things in rhythm and in the way people sit inside of rhythm, the way they sit in time. That tells a lot about where people are from and what they know. So it could be any of these components, but when something grabs me, I decide in that instant to study. And to learn it. And it's beautiful also in discovering a story behind a spark, to write out the lyrics on a piece of paper with no sound and really discover your relationship with those words and with those stories from a very you know, basic, stripped down place.
Let's talk a moment about Mark Anthony Thompson, Chocolate Genius. One of the songs on Dreaming Wide Awake is Chasing Strange. How did you come to that song?
Well, I met Mark Anthony Thompson through Craig Street. They're good
Your
friends.
Producer, right? Yeah.
And Mark is a really amazing human being. He's very striking. He has an incredible voice, speaking or singing, and he's a wonderful songwriter. He's really unique. And Craig just thought we might hit it off. Craig also introduced me to Toshi Regan, and he just took his chances. Craig Street has some really interesting hunches, and he doesn't mind following them. Even though he has had his success as a producer, he's still a guy like going with his hunches, which is very cool. And he was right about Mark and I. We connected, and Mark has such a great sense of texture to his voice and to his writing, and he came to my little apartment in Clinton Hill in Brooklyn, and just observed a few things, and I think he may have already been working on Chasing Strange, and then he just folded some images in, and it's a really beautiful piece of music.
Absolutely. You know, Craig Street, of course, worked with Cassandra Wilson a while ago, and really kind of helped reframe her career. And I remember hearing conversations, you know, amongst, say, Diane Reeves and Rochelle Farrell, you know, 20 years ago, and how, you know, everyone who wanted to be a jazz vocalist was being pitched as the next Diane Reeves, and Rochelle Farrell very much resisted that. Did you have any fear that you were going to be pigeonholed as the next Cassandra Wilson, particularly given your relationship with Craig Street as a producer?
I guess that could have been a concern, but our instruments are really different.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Cassandra Wilson is Cassandra Wilson because nobody sounds like her. She really has her own signature about her approach to music, and also she was brilliant enough to put together a band of musicians who have also become a part of her mark. People like Marvin Sewell and Brandon Ross, and Reginald Veal, Donnie Plaxico. Her musicians, Jeff Haynes, are very special, and nobody sounds like them. So it was really her great rise to notoriety had a lot to do with just a gathering of brilliant people who were a real community together, and it just, you know, it was a very great time, because it's really impossible with all those very particular components meeting on a high level to sound like Cassandra Wilson. Like, I know better. I love what I do and where I'm from, but, you know, honestly, to the ear that loves stories and knows to listen for subtle things, you know, there are no two voices and no two stories that I like.
You're watching Left of Black. We're joined this afternoon by Miss LIzz Wright, vocalist, who will be appearing here at Duke University on October the 7th. Your 2008 album, Orchard, and let me just throw out some names. Sweet Honey in the Rock, Ike and Tina Turner, Led Zeppelin, Patsy Cline, and these are the range of artists that you cover on the Orchard. It's an amazing range, right? I mean, these are folks that we very rarely think about in being in the same conversation. Were these artists that you were familiar with growing up, or were they just songs that you became attracted to because, quite frankly, they're incredible and compelling songs?
Yeah, Mark, I was not I was not introduced to any of the artists you named growing up. I listened to almost only gospel, so I really had hungry ears and a hungry mind when I left home, and I've been cramming music since about 18. And I'm like, what was going on in the world while I was under all...
Catching up,
yeah. But it's great. I actually love what happened to me, because it's just given me such a sense of appreciation and sensitivity to all these elements, and because I was only dealing with gospel, all of it is a treasure for me. You know, not just anything of a certain genre or a certain kind of artist. It's all a treasure, and I'm still like a kid. I pick things up because they're beautiful and they sparkle, or there's something. I pick them up because I'm curious, and I love where songs take me.
I particularly love your cover of Led Zeppelin, and lots of reasons for it. I have a good friend and colleague, Daphne Brooks, who teaches at Princeton, and she's doing a bunch of work now on, you know, where Black women vocalists fit into this broader rock tradition. And to be quite honest, there was just something really ballsy about, you know, the Black girl taking on Led Zeppelin and making it your own. I mean, that's the other thing about the listening. I mean, all of these songs, you know, some of them more recognizable than others, but they're all songs that you claim as LIzz Wright's, which is just such an important aspect of what you've been doing, you know, for almost a decade now.
Thank you. Well, Mark, it's a huge compliment to the people who wrote these songs, because a great song is like a well-built ship. You know, it can hold a lot of people, it can hold a lot of stories, and it hangs around a while, you know. And I'm so thankful for the company of musicians and songwriters that I keep, because they're always hit me to stuff that maybe, you know, in the past I wouldn't have felt, you know, in a strange way to say, entitled to explore. But like, we need to explore things because they're beautiful, and because they're intriguing, and because they're well built. And you know, being a songwriter, I feel like I have to know why this writer has been able to reach so many people, or what kind of writing am I drawn to, and I have to explore the voices of other people even as I develop my own. So it's a compliment to you know, to Robert Plant and all of those guys, you know, Eric Clapton and Neil Young. I mean, everybody that the work I cover, like, they built beautiful songs, and they can hold a lot of voices.
Let me change pace just a little bit. One of the things that's also been kind of fascinating in your rise, you know, I'm an album cover person. You know, I like buying CDs and going through the CD jackets and all those kinds of things. And you mentioned growing up, you know, small town in Georgia. Almost all of your releases have really featured you in very natural, even pastoral settings. And I want to talk a little bit about how conscious that is. I mean, on the one hand, you know, one of the great things about, you know, a LIzz Wright CD is that it's not that difficult to look at LIzz Wright.
You're very sweet.
And so then you also get these beautiful natural settings. I mean, how conscious has the record company or yourself been in trying to put yourself in these kind of pastoral settings?
Well, I feel like I get a lot of liberties that are based off of that one little brave moment where I didn't know no better and told Ron that I had to do what I wanted to do, or we could just part ways. But the other thing is just, yeah, I feel that who I am comes out and rests easy outside. I spend all my time outside. As soon as I'm done with this interview, I'm gonna get in the car and plant the rest of my bok choy in the mud. You know, it's really who I am, and it's where I breathe. And you know, photographers know, a good photographer knows to put people in their elements, you know, and I always try lots of things on a shoot, but it seems to always be the outdoor shots that end up being the covers. And I'm very involved in the visual part of my work because I'm an artist and I love it. And I'm blessed to collaborate with some really amazing people. And so I get involved, you know, for the orchard, for instance. I went home to my grandmother's house and I found a beautiful swamp, and I found I found an old barn that used to be like a classroom, you know, with like the first blackboards that were literally blackboards. I walked up into the old diner and was like, "Whose barn is that?" And they said, "Well, who are you?" I said, "I'm such and such's granddaughter." "Oh, come on in. You can have, you know." It was amazing. So it's fun also to grab cats from New York, you know, who do these shoots, video and film, you know, camera, and take them home and be like, "Hey, if you're gonna promote me, feel a piece of this, eat that, talk to that one over there, listen how she talks," you know. It's real, you know.
You returned to the church in your 2010 album, Fellowship. What are you working on these days?
I have a record of love songs that I need to make, and I also have some collaborations with some very dear friends that I want to jump into. So right now, my manager's job is to streamline all the things that I'm coming up with that I want to do. But yeah, I need to make a record of love songs of a certain kind. I am definitely the singer who can sing the gospel, you know, until I make myself cry. And I can also sing a love song and you know, feel conviction with that. And I like to do it in the same show. I don't really understand why there needs to be such a divide and such a separation between our sense of what's divine, you know, in our natural lives and in our soul lives. I think it's all connected, and I love to sing about how much I love somebody and how much I love my creator, like in the same breath. You know, and I love the challenge of that. I sometimes see people squirm. I see people raise up for the song that they like, and then they sit there and kind of go somewhere in their minds on another song. But I think it's important to mix things up, but with a lot of intention, you know, and accepting all parts of life, and the conversation of life is a really important part of what I do.
Absolutely. How's the move been from BK to Asheville?
There are some things I miss about Brooklyn, but I think I was trying to live a country life the whole time. When I really think about, you know, I was in line to have a little shoebox spot in the community garden in Ditmas Park before I left, and I bought a big dining table that barely fit the apartment, and I was inviting folks over all the time with the culinary school. So I think I finally let myself have the thing that I was inching towards the whole while. And New York is good to me. I love it. It'll always be one of my homes, and it holds my musical family, but it's really nice to have some dirt and have some space. And I think mountains are good for me, someone like me. You know, when you travel and you sleep in different beds and you're so exposed, it's nice to come home and feel so incredibly grounded by these big piles of earth that have just been watching it all go by. You know?
We've been joined this afternoon by Ms. LIzz Wright, vocalist, who will be performing here at Duke University on October the 7th. Thank you for joining us, Liz.
What a pleasure, Mark.
It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you also. Take care, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
Thanks.
Produced by Duke University. Online at duke.edu.